The massive halls of the Stellaris Empire's royal palace had never felt so empty. These golden corridors, once filled with laughter and the busy footsteps of visitors from across the galaxy, now echoed with nothing but worried whispers and fearful silence. The grand chandeliers still sparkled with starlight, but their glow seemed dim and cold. Something terrible had happened. Something that shook the very foundation of the greatest empire in the known universe. Queen Lyria was dying. The news had spread faster than light itself, jumping from planet to planet, system to system. In the farthest corners of space, on worlds with 3 suns and moons made of crystal, people gathered in their own ways to pray for their beloved queen. Some had never seen her face, but everyone knew her name. Everyone knew her story. Queen Lyria wasn't just any ruler. She was a legend wrapped in mystery, a woman who had supposedly lived for hundreds of years without aging a single day. Some said she was blessed by the stars themselves. Others whispered that she held secrets older than most civilizations. But one thing everyone agreed on: she was eternal, unbreakable, immortal. Until now, the palace doctors had tried everything. They brought in healers from the ice planets of Zephyron, where medicine was an art form. They called upon the crystal singers of Avalon, whose voices could mend broken bones. Even the machine doctors from the robot worlds came with their perfect calculations and endless knowledge. Nothing worked. The illness was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It moved through the queen's body like a slow, cruel poison, stealing her strength bit by bit. Her golden skin turned pale as moonlight. Her eyes, once bright as twin stars, grew dim and tired. The woman who had stood before armies without fear now struggled to sit up in bed in her private chambers. The heart of the empire had become a hospital. Strange machines hummed and beeped around her bed, their lights blinking like worried stars. Doctors from a dozen different worlds stood around her, speaking in hushed voices, their faces grave with defeat. For the first time in centuries, Queen Lyria felt truly afraid. Not of death. She had faced that before. But of what her death would mean for the billions of people who looked to her for protection and hope. Her closest advisors, old friends who had served her for decades, watched helplessly as their queen grew weaker each day. They had tried everything, spent fortunes on rare medicines, consulted with the wisest beings in the galaxy. Nothing helped then. In a moment of pure desperation, they made a choice that surprised everyone, including themselves. They sent out a call for help to every world, every system, every corner of space. Not just to the famous doctors and legendary healers, but to anyone who might have an answer. The message was simple: our queen is dying. Please help. The response was overwhelming. Ships arrived daily, bringing doctors, healers, medicine makers, and wise people from thousands of different worlds. They came with crystals that glowed with healing light, with potions made from rare flowers that bloomed only once every 100 years. With machines so advanced they seemed like magic. But still, Queen Lyria grew weaker. Days turned into weeks. The palace filled with the smartest minds in the galaxy, all working together, all failing together. The queen's breathing became shallow. Her sleep was filled with fever dreams. The cold that had settled in her bones spread deeper, making her shiver even under the warmest blankets. Hope was fading like a dying star. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, a small ship landed in the palace courtyard. It wasn't sleek like the vessels from the advanced worlds, or massive like the healing ships from the medical planets. It was simple, almost plain, with Earth markings on its side. Out stepped Dr. Mark Bennett. He was not what anyone expected. While the other doctors wore flowing robes or gleaming uniforms, Mark wore a simple brown jacket and carried an old leather bag that looked like it had seen 1,000 journeys. His hair was starting to turn gray, and he had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The palace guards almost turned him away. After all, what could one human doctor do when the greatest minds in the galaxy had failed? Earth was barely known in the outer systems, a small blue planet with people who had only recently learned to travel between stars. But Queen Lyria's advisors were desperate. They had tried everything else. What harm could one more doctor do? When Mark was brought before the Queen's advisors, they looked at him with a mixture of hope and doubt. Here was this quiet man from a small world, claiming he might be able to help their immortal queen. Some of the advisors whispered among themselves, wondering if grief and desperation had made them foolish. "What makes you think you can succeed where others have failed?" asked General Thorne, the Queen's oldest friend and protector. Mark adjusted his glasses and spoke softly. "I don't know if I can help, but I've been a doctor for 30 years. I've learned that sometimes the simplest answers are hiding behind the most complex problems. I'd like to try if you'll let me." There was something in his voice, not arrogance or false confidence, but a gentle determination that reminded them of their queen herself. After a long moment of silence, they agreed to let him see her. The queen's chamber was like nothing Mark had ever seen. It was enormous, with walls that seemed to be made of captured starlight. The ceiling showed a perfect view of space, with nebulas swirling in slow, beautiful dances. But Mark's attention was focused on the small figure in the center of the room. Queen Lyria lay in a bed that looked like it was carved from a single piece of silver. Tubes and wires connected her to machines that hummed with alien technology. But Mark ignored all of that. He saw only a woman who was very sick and very tired. He approached slowly, respectfully. When he was close enough, he could see that despite her illness, there was still something magical about her. Her silver hair seemed to catch light that wasn't there, and even in sleep she looked wise and strong. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "my name is Dr. Mark Bennett. I'm here to help, if I can." Lyria's eyes opened slowly. They were the color of deep space, dark blue with flecks of silver like distant stars. She studied him for a long moment. This strange human who had come so far to see her. "Another doctor?" she whispered, her voice weak but still carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Tell me, Dr. Bennett from the small blue world, what do you see that others have missed?" Mark pulled up a chair beside her bed. "I don't know yet, Your Majesty, but I'd like to find out if you'll let me." For the first time in weeks, something like a smile touched the Queen's lips. There was something refreshing about his honesty, his lack of grand promises or miracle cures. "Very well," she said, "but I warn you, many have tried and failed. This illness is unlike anything in my long life." "Then we'll figure it out together," Mark said simply. And so began the strangest partnership in the history of the Empire. A dying galactic queen and a humble human doctor, working together against an enemy they couldn't yet understand. Mark spent his first days in the palace, learning everything he could about the Queen's condition. He read through mountains of reports from the other doctors, studied samples under microscopes that could see individual atoms, and observed every symptom with the careful eye of someone who had spent decades learning to notice the small things that others missed. The other doctors and healers watched him with curiosity and, in some cases, barely hidden amusement. Here was this simple human using basic tools and asking elementary questions. While they had already tried every advanced technique known to science, but Mark had something they didn't: patience, and the ability to see patterns where others saw only chaos. He noticed that the Queen's symptoms seemed to follow a rhythm, getting worse at certain times and better at others. He saw that some of the advanced treatments actually made her weaker, not stronger. Most importantly, he observed that despite all the high-tech medicine surrounding her, no one was treating her like a person. They were all so focused on her illness that they had forgotten she was someone who needed comfort and care, not just cures. On his third night in the palace, Mark made a decision that shocked everyone. He asked for all the complex machines to be turned off for a few hours. He wanted to examine the Queen the old-fashioned way by talking to her. listening to her heart and using his own senses to understand what was happening. "This is madness," protested Dr. Zellian, a brilliant healer from the crystal worlds. "Those machines are keeping her alive." "Maybe," Mark said quietly, "but they're also keeping us from really seeing her." Queen Lyria, despite her weakness, was intrigued. "Let him try," she said. "What do we have to lose?" As the machines powered down and the room grew quiet for the first time in weeks, Mark sat beside the Queen's bed and did something no one else had thought to do. He asked her to tell him about her illness in her own words. "When did it start?" he asked gently. "How did it feel? What makes it better or worse?" As Queen Lyria spoke, Mark listened with complete attention. He didn't interrupt or rush her. He just let her tell her story, and as she did, he began to see patterns that all the advanced technology had missed. The illness had started after a diplomatic mission to a world at the edge of the galaxy. It began as tiredness, then became weakness, then the strange cold that seemed to come from inside her bones. But there was something else, a feeling she described as being disconnected from myself. Mark's eyes lit up. "Your Majesty, may I ask you something that might sound strange? Do you feel different from how you normally feel? Not just sick, but changed somehow?" Queen Lyria stared at him in surprise. "So," she whispered, "it's as if I'm fading away, becoming less than." How did you know?" Mark was quiet for a long time, thinking. Then he said, "I need to do some research. Can you give me until tomorrow?" That night, Mark didn't sleep. He went through every report, every test result, every piece of information about the Queen's illness. But he also did something else. He researched Queen Lyria herself, learning about her long life, her abilities, and the mysteries that surrounded her. By morning, he had a theory. It was crazy, impossible, and completely different from what everyone else believed. But it was the only thing that made sense. When he presented his idea to the Queen's advisors, they thought he had lost his mind. "You're saying she's not sick at all?" General Thorne asked, his voice incredulous. "Not in the way we understand sickness," Mark explained. "I think something is interfering with whatever makes her special, her long life, her abilities. What if they come from some kind of connection to energy or force we don't understand? And what if that connection is being blocked or damaged?" That alien doctor scoffed. Dr. Zellian laughed outright. "Human medicine is so primitive," he said. "You're talking about magic, not science." But Queen Lyria had been listening from her bed, and something in Mark's words resonated with her. "Go on," she said softly. "The planet you visited," Mark continued. "The one where this all started. What was special about it?" "It was dead," the Queen said slowly. "A world where all life had been drained away. We went there to investigate, to see if we could help. But there was nothing left, just empty stone and silence." Mark nodded. "What if whatever killed that world is still there? What if it attached itself to you somehow, feeding on the same energy that keeps you young and strong?" The room fell silent. It was such a simple idea, yet no one had thought of it. "You're right," Queen Lyria said. "Then how do we stop it?" "We don't fight it," Mark said. "We starve it." And so began the strangest treatment in galactic history. Instead of trying to cure Queen Lyria with medicine or technology, Mark worked to help her reconnect with whatever force had kept her alive for centuries. He started with simple things: meditation, breathing exercises, techniques he had learned from Earth's ancient healing traditions. The other doctors watched in amazement as this primitive human sat with their advanced queen, teaching her to listen to her own body and spirit. Slowly, very slowly, it began to work. The first sign was her breathing. It became deeper, more regular. Then her skin began to regain some of its natural glow. The terrible cold that had settled in her bones started to recede. But the most important change was in her eyes. The life began to return to them, the spark that had made her a legend across the galaxy. It took weeks, but Queen Lyria grew stronger every day. And as she healed, she found herself watching Dr. Mark Bennett with growing fascination. This quiet human had succeeded where the greatest minds in the galaxy had failed. But more than that, he had treated her not as a myth or a legend, but as a person who needed help. He had seen her not as the immortal Queen Lyria, but as someone who was afraid and in pain. During the long hours of her recovery, they talked. Mark told her about Earth, about his life as a simple doctor in a small town, about the patients he had cared for over the years. In return, Lyria shared stories of her long life, of worlds she had seen born and die, of the loneliness that came with being ageless in a universe where everything else changed. "Ah, why did you really come here?" she asked him one evening as he checked her pulse. "A ritual," he continued, even though she was clearly getting better. Mark paused, considering his answer. "Because when I heard the call for help, I couldn't ignore it. Someone needed help, and I'm a doctor. It's what I do." "But you risked everything," Lyria said. "Your career, your reputation, your life. You came to help someone you'd never met in a place you'd never been?" Mark smiled. "My grandfather used to say that sometimes the most important thing you can do is show up. Even if you don't have all the answers, even if you might fail, sometimes just being there is enough." Something stirred in Queen Lyria's heart, a feeling she hadn't experienced in centuries. This humble human had not only saved her life, but had shown her a kind of courage and compassion she had almost forgotten existed as she grew stronger. She realized that Dr. Mark Bennett had given her more than just her health back. He had reminded her what it meant to truly care for another person and, more surprisingly, what it felt like to be truly cared for in return. The seeds of something profound had been planted in those quiet hours of healing. Something that would change both their lives in ways neither of them could yet imagine. But that, as they say, is another story entirely. Would come to change them both and eventually the entire Stellaris Empire itself. The days passed in a delicate rhythm. Within Queen Lea's recovery chamber each sunrise, marking a quiet victory over the illness that had nearly claimed her life. The once debilitating sickness no longer held her in its icy grip, and her body, though fragile, was slowly beginning to reclaim its former strength. But in the long hours of healing, a new vulnerability took root, tone that went far deeper than the physical scars left by her illness. It was a vulnerability she had not anticipated, one that had nothing to do with her body and everything to do with the figure who sat at her bedside day after day, tending to her with a calm, unbreakable resolve. Dr. Mark Bennett had become a constant presence, a guardian figure who seemed to understand her needs even before she did. He was there in the quiet mornings when she opened her eyes. The first figure she saw, steady and focused, was there as night fell, his silhouette softened by the glow of monitors and the flickering lights of Ophalian machinery. Always vigilant, always close, his presence was gentle yet undeniable, an anchor that kept her tethered to the world when the isolation of her condition threatened to pull her under. Yet, as she healed, the nature of their relationship began to change in ways Leon could hardly understand. She had drooled over empires, seeing worlds crumble and reborn, but Mark's care and quiet devotion touched something within her. All her years of life had not prepared her for. At first, she thought it was simply the comfort of companionship, relief of having someone nearby after so long a period of isolation. But it was more than that. She felt it in the way her eyes lingered on him, watching his careful movements as he adjusted her blankets, checked her vitals, prepared yet another herbal remedy in his methodical, attentive way. Mark was more than her healer. He was a man who saw her not as a ruler, not as a near mythical being, but as a person, someone in need of care, comfort, and understanding. And for Liaho had spent centuries armored by her status and power, this quiet recognition was both terrifying and exhilarating. In the beginning, their conversations were sparse, marked by the formality befitting a queen and her subject. Mark was respectful, almost reverent, never once crossing the invisible line that separated them. But as her health improved, So too did their exchanges. She began to ask him questions, probingly at first, as if testing the waters of this new dynamic that was unfolding between them. "Tell me about Earth," she asked one evening, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the question itself could disrupt the quiet intimacy of the room. "I've read reports, studied records, but they only show data, statistics, numbers. I want to know what it feels like." Mark looked at her, surprise flickering across his face before softening into a thoughtful smile. "Earth," he murmured, as though conjuring up memories from a place that felt both near and distant. "It's a beautiful contraction T. It can be harsh and unforgiving, but it's also resilient. The people there, they survive, not because they serve the most advanced, but because they know how to adapt, to find beauty in small things. Life on Earth is different." The way he spoke of his homeworld painted a picture for Leia that was for more vivid than any record she'd ever read. She could almost see it, a world of vast oceans, dense for simple lives filled with quiet moments and humble joys. It was a world so unlike her own, and yet through Mark's words it felt achingly familiar, as if she were glimpsing a part of herself she had long forgotten. As days turned into weeks there, conversations grew longer, delving into realms she'd once considered mundane but now found herself craving. Mark told her stories of his childhood on Earth, of the dusty streets of Hishamtown, of sunsets over the oceans that sparkled like liquid fire. He spoke of his family, friends, and the struggles he'd faced as a doctor, of the lives he'd saved and those he hadn't, the ones that taunted him still. He spoke with an honesty that was both disarming and comforting, as if he'd shed any pretensier formality in her presence, sharing pieces of himself without hesitation. In return, Leah began to share her own stories, though hers were grand and sprawling tales of ancient wars and intergalactic treaties, of empires won and lost. Yet, as she spoke, she found herself revealing more than she'd intended. She spoke of the loneliness, of leadership, of the sacrifices she'd made, the relationships she'd let fade, all in the pursuit of power and peace for her people. She had been a queen for so long, her life defined by duty and unyielding strength, that she had forgotten what it meant to be simple herself. Mark listened with the kind of patience and empathy that seemed to come naturally to him, his eyes reflecting a quiet understanding that made her feel both vulnerable and safe. He asked questions not out of curiosity, but out of a genuine desire to understand her, not as a ruler, but as Empress. One evening, as the soft glow of the palace lights bathed her room in an ethereal shimmer, Mark brought her a small, delicate plant from one of Earth's lush forests. It was modest by galactic standards, with slender green leaves and a few shy blossoms. "This is lavender," he explained, his voice gentle. "On Earth, it's known for its calming effects. It helps with sleep, with healing. I thought it might bring you a little comfort." Leah took the plant in her hands, its simple beauty stirring something deep within her. She lifted it to her face, breathing in its gentle scent, and felt a sense of peace wash over her, a peace she hadn't felt in centuries. It was a small gesture, yet it meant more to her than Mark could have known. In the quiet hours of the night, she found herself lying awake, her thoughts lingering on him in a way that was unfamiliar, even unsettling. She couldn't deny the warmth that his presence brought, the ease with which he seemed to see through her defenses, his kindness unraveling the layers she had carefully constructed around herself over centuries. She had never allowed herself to be so vulnerable, so unguarded, but with Mark it felt almost natural, as if this connection between them had always been there, waiting to be discovered. Their companionship grew into an unspoken bond, a shared understanding that transcended words, and as Leah's health continued to improve, she realized with a pang that one day Mark would return to Earth, leaving her to resume life she had known before. The thought left her with a strange, hollow ache, one that she could neither name nor ignore. Yet the more time they spent together, the more she began to wonder if there might be a way to keep him by her side, not as her healer, but as a friend, perhaps even something more and more. But such thoughts were dangerous and sheepish. them aside, clinging to the moments they shared, instead each one a treasure she held close to her heart one day as Mark was adjusting a bandage on her wrist, his fingers brushing against her skin with the gentlest of touches. She looked at him, her gaze steady. Mark. She began softly, her voice tinged with a vulnerability she hadn't allowed herself to express before. I owe you more than I can ever repay, not just for saving my life, but for being here, for seeing me as more than a ruler. She hesitated, then continued, her words barely above a whisper. Tell me, is there anything you desire? A reward? A gift? Something I can give you in return for all you've done? Mark looked up, his expression thoughtful, his eyes warm as they met hers. He shook his head slightly, his mouth curving into a gentle smile. There's no need for that, Your Majesty. I didn't come here for a reward. I came to help because I couldn't stand by knowing there was someone in need. But as he looked at her, something flickered in his gaze, a quiet longing that he hadn't dared to voice until that moment, although he said almost hesitantly, if I could ask for one thing, it would be time. Time to know you better, not as a queen, but as Leah, the person behind the crown. The simplicity of his wish left her breathless. She had expected grand requests, demands for wealth, power, or influence, but Mark's desire was as humble and genuine as the man himself. A wish born of sincerity, not ambition. He simply wanted to know her, to understand her beyond the titles and the regalia. Time, she echoed softly, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth for the first time. The idea of granting a wish felt like a gift, not for him but for herself. She could see the openness in his expression, the quiet hope that she would say yes, and in that moment Shek knew that this simple request was more precious than any jewel or title she could offer. With a nod she granted his wish, as their gazes locked. An unspoken promise passed between them, a promise of companionship, of trust, of something deeper that neither dared to name. The palace had taken on a strange new rhythm, quieter, more intimate pulse that only two souls shared. For all the grandeur of the Stellaris Empire, its vast halls and glittering corridors, a single wish had transformed the world within those walls. Shifting the center of its universe, Queen Leah's recovery was no longer a solitary journey. It was one she now shared with Mark Bennett, her humble yet remarkable human healer. Mark's wish had been simple: to spend more time with Leah, to understand her beyond the authority she wielded and the titles she bore, and she in turn found herself intrigued, drawn by a desire as strange and ancient as she waste. Boundaries that had once kept her aloof and distant now felt irrelevant, as if they belonged to a different person, a different life. In the mornings they would walk through the palace gardens, an ethereal sanctuary teeming with flora from countless worlds. The plants ranged from majestic trees with silver leaves that shimmered in the sun to delicate blooms that glowed faintly in the shade, exuding subtle fragrances that shifted with the breeze. For Leah, these gardens had been a symbol of her empire's greatness, a collection of the rarest, most exotic specimens in the galaxy. But Mark's presence transformed them into something different, something simpler and more precious. It was here, under the Vestilian sky, that she first felt the weight of her crown slip away, replaced by the quiet joy of simply being. They walked side by side, neither ruler nor subject, but two individuals bound by an invisible thread. As they strolled, Mark would sometimes reach out to gently touch a leaf or a petal, his fingers brushing the delicate life that surrounded them with the same reverence he'd shown her. Leah found herself watching him more closely than she ever had before, noticing the small details. The way his brow furrowed when he was deep in thought, the warmth that lit his eyes when he looked at her, the quiet confidence in his stride that reminded her of Earth's mountains, solid and unwavering. One morning, as they wandered through a grove of trees that whispered with an ancient alien language, Mark finally spoke, his voice soft yet filled with curiosity. What was it like, he asked, glancing at her, to become a queen, to take on the responsibility of all of this? Leah paused, the question catching her off guard. It had been century essence anyone had asked her about her beginnings, let alone expressed. Such genuine interest, but Mark's eyes held no expectation, only a gentle patience that seemed to invite her to share without judgment. When I was younger, she began slowly, her gaze drifting over the treetops. I never wanted the throne my dreams were. Simpler, I wanted to study the stars, to be free to explore the cosmos without the burden of an empire. She smiled faintly, a hint of nostalgia coloring her expression, but the empire needed a ruler and my path was chosen for me. I didn't resist, I accepted my duty, and over time, it became who I was. It became everything. Mark nodded, listening insolence as she continued. There were wars, she said, her voice carrying a distant, almost haunted tone. Decisions that haunted me, lives lost, all in the name of stability. Oh, Forder, I had to become someone unbreakable, someone who could carry the weight of billions without hesitation. And somewhere along the way, I forgot who I was before the crown. I became a symbol, a figurehead, and the world forgot that there was ever a person beneath the title. Her words hung in the air, laden with the weight of unspoken in years. She looked at Mark, expecting to see pity or sympathy, but his expression was one of quiet understanding. Do you miss it? He asked gently. That freedom, the chance to be just. Leia, she felt a strange pang in her chest, a sense of longing she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge until now. I didn't, not until recently. It's easy to forget, to lose oneself in duty. But Senseo came since we've talked. Yes, I think I do miss it. They walked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Rhea felt a sense of relief, a strange lightness, infinitely speaking of the bird she'd carried alone for so long, and Mark Force's part seemed content to let her words settle, never pushing, never prodding, simply walking beside her, as if his presence alone was enough to ease her heart. Their companionship deepened with each passing day, filling the spaces between them with a warmth that felt as real and tangible as the alien blooms surrounding them. Mark's sincerity, his gentle curiosity, and his unwavering kindness became a balm to her spirit. She found herself laughing with him, something she hadn't done in ages. Soft, genuine laughter that felt like a release, like a part of herself was returning after centuries of dorky, and in return she began to learn more about Mark, his life back on Earth, his struggles and triumphs. He spoke of his years in medical school, of long nights spent studying by candlelight when the electricity failed. In his modest apartment, he told her about the first patient he lost, a child's face he still saw in dreams, and the helplessness that nearly drove him from his calling. Shared stories of his family, of the mother he still missed, and the sister who had always believed in him even when had doubted himself. One evening, as they sat beneath the galaxy's twin moons, Mark looked at her, his expression thoughtful. You know, I always thought I'd be ordinary, he said quietly, a faint smile playing on his lips. Just another doctor in a small town, doing my best to help people. I never imagined I'd end up here in a palace among the stars, healing a queen. He glanced at her, a hint of wondering his gaze. And yet, this feels right, like this is where I was. Mentoblia's heart swelled at his words, at the quiet honesty in his voice. She had never heard anyone speak so openly, so vulnerably, and she realized then that Mark had given her a gift. Beyond healing, had given her a sense of humanity, a reminder of the simple, unguarded connections she had sacrificed long ago in her quest for power and stability. As days turned into weeks, Ark's wish, this simple wish for time, became a cherished ritual, a sanctuary of shared moments that only they could understand. And slowly, subtly, Leah found herself feeling things she hadn't allowed herself to feel in Cone. Afternoon, they were sitting by a crystalline lake on the palace grounds, the water reflecting the sky's pink and violet hues. Luria was telling him about a distant world where the seas glowed with bioluminescent creatures, casting an eternal twilight over the landscape. Mark listened, his face alight with fascination. I'd love to see that someday, he said, leaning back with a wistful sigh. There's so much out there, so many worlds, and I never thought I'd be able to see any of it. Lilia studied him for a moment, a spark of an idea taking shape. Perhaps one day. Yeah, well, the galaxy is vast, but it is also open to those with the courage to explore. Right? He looked at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Do you mean that? She nodded, feeling a strange thrill at the thought. You've shown me so much, Mark. It only seems fair to return the favor. Their gazes met, and in that moment, there was no queen. No healer, only two souls bound by an unspoken understanding. Shay wanted to tell him that he had healed her in ways he could never understand, that his presence had restored not just her body, but a part of her spirit she thought had been lost forever. But the words felt too heavy, too close to something she wasn't ready to admit. Instead, she reached out, her fingers brushing his. The touch was brief but electric, a spark that lingered between them long after she withdrew her hand. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft ethereal glow over the lake, Mark turned to her, his voice filled with a gentle reverence. "Thank you, Lyria," he murmured, his words barely audible. "Thank you for letting me see this side of you, for letting me be here." She looked at him, her heart racing, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions she could no longer ignore. She had once been a woman who ruled empires, who wielded power with an iron hand. But now, in the presence of this humble human, she felt something far greater, something raw, vulnerable, and undeniable. Ariel, in granting Mark his simple wish for time, she had opened a door. She could no longer close a door that led to a part of herself she hadn't known still existed. And in the soft silence of the twilight, beneath a sky filled with stars that stretched across galaxies, Leah understood that her life would never be the same again. The universe stretched endless LLY before them, a dark canvas scattered with brilliant pinpricks of light stars flickering across galaxies, a tapestry of wonder. For centuries, Leah had traveled this vast expanse as a queen, a ruler, bound by duty and diplomacy, her journeys dictated by the needs of her empire. But today was different. Today she was not traveling as a monarch, but as herself, bound not for a distant planet of high political stakes, but to Earth, the home world of the man who had saved her life. Second wish had been simple yet monumental. He had asked to show her his world, to share with her the sight, sounds, and spirit of Earth. It was a humble wish, one that came without grandeur or ambition. But to Leah it felt like a pilgrimage, a chance to glimpse a piece of the universe she had only known through cold records and impersonal reports. And so she had arranged the journey in secret, her advisors and guards sworn to silence, leaving behind her titles and the weight of her crown, at least for a few precious days. As they approached Earth, Mark's excitement was palpable, a quiet thrill that transformed his usually calm demeanor into something vibrant, almost boyish. He gazed out of the viewing window with an expression Leah had never seen on him before, an unguarded joy that made her heart swell with warmth. "There it is," he whispered, more to himself than to her, his eyes fixed on the blue green orb growing larger as they narrated. Leah felt her own anticipation stir as she gazed at the planet, its oceans and continents gleaming in the sunlight. Earth was small, almost delicate in the vastness of space, yet there was something enchanting about it, a sense of life and resilience that resonated deeply within her. She glanced at Mark, catching his eye, and he smiled, a smile that held the promise of stories yet untold. Their ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, slipping past clouds that seemed to part in welcome. They land in a secluded area on the outskirts of Mark's hometown, a place shielded from prying eyes, a quiet pocket of nature where they could emerge. Lyria had insisted on traveling discreetly, wearing a simple cloak that concealed her alien features. The glimmer of her regal attire replaced with something humble. She wanted this journey to be as unguarded as possible. A chanchetta walk among Mark's people without the barrier of her status. As they stepped out of the ship, air hit her with a freshness she hadn't anticipated, at a cool, earthy scent mingled with the crispness of pine trees and the faint temps of teas of salt from a distant sea. It was so different from her spirit she thought had been lost forever. But the words felt too heavy, too close to something she wasn't ready to admit. Instead, she reached out, her fingers brushing his. The touch was brief but electric, a spark that lingered between them long after she withdrew her hand. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft ethereal glow over the lake, Mark turned to her, his voice filled with A gentle reverence. "Thank you, Lyria." He murmured, his words barely audible. "Thank you for letting me see this side of you, for letting me be here." She looked at him, her heart racing, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions she could no longer ignore. She had once been a woman who ruled empires, who wielded power with an iron hand. But now, in the presence of this humble human, she felt something far greater, something raw, vulnerable, and undeniably real in granting Mark his simple wish for time. She had opened a door. She could no longer close a door that led to a part of herself she hadn't known still existed, and in the soft silence of the twilight, beneath a sky filled with stars that stretched across galaxies, Lyria understood that her life would never be the same again. The universe stretched endless before them, a dark canvas scattered with brilliant pinpricks of light, stars flickering across galaxies, a tapestry of wonder. For centuries, Leah had traveled this vast expanse as a queen, a ruler, bound by duty and diplomacy, her journeys dictated by the needs of her empire. But today, today she was not traveling as a monarch, but as herself, bound not for a distant planet of high political stakes, but to Earth, the home world of the man who had saved her life. Mark's second wish had been simple yet monumental. He had asked to show her his world, to share with her the sight, sounds, and spirit of Earth. It was a humble wish, one that came without grandeur or ambition. But to Leah it felt like a pilgrimage, a chance to glimpse a piece of the universe she had only known through cold records and impersonal reports. And so she had arranged the journey in secret, her advisors and guards sworn to silence, leaving behind her titles and the weight of her crown, at least for a few precious days. As they approached Earth, Mark's excitement was palpable, a quiet thrill that transformed his usually calm demeanor into something vibrant, almost boyish. He gazed out of the viewing window with an expression Leah had never seen on him before, an unguarded joy that made her heart swell with warmth. "There it is," he whispered, more to himself than to her, his eyes fixed on the blue green orb growing larger as they neared. Leah felt her own anticipation stir as she gazed at the planet, its oceans and continents gleaming in the sunlight. Earth was small, almost delicate in the vastness of space, yet there was something enchanting about it, a sense of life and resilience that resonated deeply within her. She glanced at Mark, catching his eye, and he smiled, a smile that held the promise of stories yet untold. Their ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, slipping past clouds that seemed to part in welcome. They land in a secluded area on the outskirts of Mark's hometown, a place shielded from prying eyes, a quiet pocket of nature where they could emerge. Leia had insisted on traveling discreetly, wearing a simple cloak that concealed her alien features, the glimmer of her regal attire replaced with something humble. She wanted this journey to be as unguarded as possible. At sterile atmospheres of interstellar craft so alive that it felt almost like a shock to her senses, Mark led her through a winding path, his steps familiar and confident, his gaze warm with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. "This forest," he explained, gesturing to the tall, ancient trees. "Explorers on some grand adventure." Leah couldn't help but smile. Her gaze, drifting to the towering trees, seemed to watch over them like silent guardians. She could almost picture a young Mark running through these woods, his laughter ringing out imagined worlds beyond Earth's sky. It was a strangely intimate glimpse into his life, a piece of him that she felt honored to share. As they walked, Mark reached for her hand, guiding her over a small stream with a natural ease that surprised her. His touch was warm, grounding, and she felt a faint thrill at the simple, unceremonious way he led her through his world. She realized then that she had been missing something essential in her life, a connection to something real, something grounded in the ordinary body of existence. In her world of advanced technologies and grand titles, the simple act of walking hand in hand through a forest felt like a revelation. They emerged from the fray to find themselves standing on the edge of a wide-open field that sloped down to a small town nestled below. Luria looked out over the scene, taking in the cozy rooftops, the winding roads, the faint outline of children playing in the distance. Everything felt both small and infinite the world condensed, yet brimming with life. Mark watched her, gauging her reaction. "It's nothing like your empire, Ichno." He said, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice, "but this Isham." Leah shook her head, her gaze soft. "It's beautiful." Mark, "It's Olive." They descended into the town, weaving through quiet streets and passing by rows of small, brightly painted houses. Mark pointed out landmarks from his childhood, the school he had attended, the bakery that made his favorite bread, the park where he'd learned to ride a bicycle. As he spoke, his voice fell with an affection that made Lyria feel as if she were stepping into his memories, seeing the world through high sighs. At one point, he stopped in front of a small weathered building with a faded sign that read, "The Blue Orchid." Mark's face softened with a kind of nostalgic reverence. "This was where I had my first job," he said with a laugh. "I was a busboy here when I was 15. They paid me in tips and leftover pie slices. Not the most glamorous work, but I learned a Lothar." Luia smiled, imagining a younger Mark, humble and hardworking, learning Thevalu of small, honest work. It was a world so far removed from her own that it felt almost surreal, yet she found herself charmed by its simplicity, by the unassuming beauty of the life he had led. As they continued their walk, Leia noticed the glances people gave them. Curious, yet respectful. Mark was well known in his town, and he greeted Avarian with a warm smile, a nod, sometimes a handshake. She could see theodomeration in their eyes, the trust they placed in him. It was clear he was more than just a doctor to them. He was a pillar of the community, a steady presence who cared for their well-being as much as he did for her own. Eventually, Mark led her to a small rocky path that wound down to the shore of a hidden cove. The beach was empty, a secluded stretch of sand cradled by towering cliffs, the waves crashing softly in a soothing rhythm. Leah felt a pang of awe as she looked out over the ocean, a vast expanse of water that stretched to the horizon, its depths darkened, mysterious. Mark sat down on the sand, and she joined him, feeling the cool grains beneath her fingers. The ocean breeze ruffled her hair, carrying with it the scent of salt and freedom, and she closed her eyes, allowing herself to fully absorb the sensation. "This is my favorite place," Mark said softly, gazing out at the waves. "Whenever life felt too heavy, I'd come here. Something about the ocean, it reminds me that we're all just a small part of something much larger." "It's humbling." Leah opened her eyes, looking at them with a tenderness she could no longer hide. "Thank you for bringing me here, Mark. I've seen so many worlds, beauty, never felt this." She gestured to the waves, to the sky, to the land that stretched out around them. "This sense of connection. It's as if I'm part of something, not just above it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the waves lap at the shore, the sky changing hues. As the sun began to set, Leah felt a quiet peace settle within her, a feeling of belonging that she hadn't known she was capable of in this moment. She was not a queen, not heir of an empire. She was simply Leah, a woman sitting beside someone who had come to mean more to her than she could put into words. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light over the water, Mark reached into his bag, pulling out a small worn notebook. He handed it to her, his expression warm yet uncertain. "These are memories, thoughts I've written down over the years. I'd like you to have it if ya went. It's nothing grand, just pieces of my life." But he trailed off, a hint of vulnerability in his gaze. Lara took the notebook, her heart swelling at the gesture. She opened it, her fingers tracing over the inked word sketches, notes, and reflections that filled the pages. It was a piece of him, a fragment of his world offered freely and without reservation. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, a surge of hadn't expected. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. "This means more to me than you know." They stayed by the ocean until the stars emerged, a blanket of light stretching across the sky. Mark pointed out constellations, telling her stories of Earth's legends, myths, and ancient tales passed down through generations. She listened, enthralled, her heart aching with a longing she could no longer deny. She realized in this quiet moment under the star set, she had found something she had spent centuries searching for something she hadn't known she needed until it washed her beside her as the night deepened. Mark finally turned to her, his face illuminated by soft starlight. "Thank you for coming with me, Lyria," he said, his voice filled with an honesty that pierced her soul. "I wanted you and set a walk among Mark's people without." The barrier of her status as they stepped out of the ship air hit her with a freshness she hadn't anticipated, at a cool, earthy scent mingled with the crispness of pine trees and the faint temps of salt from a distant sea. It was so different from the sterile atmospheres of interstellar craft, so alive that it felt almost like a shock to her senses. Mark led her through a winding path, his steps familiar and confident, his gaze warm with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. "This forest," he explained, gesturing to the tall, ancient trees around them, "it's where I used to come. As was a kid, my sister and I would play here for hours pretending we were explorers on some grand adventure." Leah couldn't help but smile, her gaze drifting to the towering trees that seemed to watch over them like silent guardians. She could almost picture a young Mark running through these woods, his laughter ringing out imagined worlds beyond Earth's sky. It was a strangely intimate glimpse into his life, a piece of him that she felt honored to share. As they walked, Mark reached for her hand, guiding her over a small stream with a natural ease that surprised her. His touch was warm, grounding, and shuffled a faint thrill at the simple, unceremonious way he led her through his world. She realized then that she had been missing something essential in her life, a connection to something real, something grounded in the ordinary boat of existence in a world of advanced technologies and grand titles. The simple act of walking hand in hand through a forest felt like a revelation. They emerged from the fray to find themselves standing on the edge of a wide-open field that sloped down to a small town nestled below. Lyria looked out over the scene, taking in the cozy rooftops, the winding roads, the faint outline of children playing in the distance. Everything felt both small and infinite, the world condensed yet brimming with life. Mark watched her, gauging her reaction. "It's nothing like your empire, Ichno," he said, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice. "But this is home." Leah shook her head, her gaze soft. "It's beautiful, Mark, it's salive." They descended into the town, weaving through quiet streets and passing by rows of small, brightly painted houses. Mark pointed out landmarks from his childhood, the school he had attended, the bakery that made his favorite bread, the park where he'd learned to ride a bicycle. As he spoke, his voice filled with an affection that made Lyria feel as if she were stepping into his memories, seeing the world through high size. At one point, he stopped in front of a small, weathered building with a faded sign that read "The Blue Orchid." Mark's face softened with a kind of nostalgic reverence. "This was where I had my first job," he said with a laugh. "I was a busboy here when I was 15. They paid me in tips and leftover pie slices. Not the most glamorous work, but I learned a Luthar." Leia smiled, imagining a younger Mark, humble and hardworking, learning the value of small, honest work. It was a world so far removed from her own that it felt almost surreal. Yet she found herself charmed by its simplicity, by the unassuming beauty of the life he had led. As they continued their walk, Leia noticed the glances people gave them, curious yet respectful. Mark was well known in his town, and he greeted Avarian with a warm smile, a nod, sometimes a handshake. She could see the admiration in their eyes, the trust they placed in him. It was clear he was more than just a doctor to them. He was a pillar of the community, a steady presence who cared for their well-being as much as he did for her own. Eventually, Mark led her to a small rocky path that wound down to the shore of a hidden cove. The beach was empty, a secluded stretch of sand, cradled by towering cliffs, the waves crashing softly in a soothing rhythm. Leah felt a pang of awe as she looked out over the ocean, a vast expanse of water that stretched to the horizon, its depths darkened, mysterious. Mark sat down on the sand, and she joined him, feeling the cool grains beneath her fingers. The ocean breeze ruffled her hair, carrying with it the scent of salt and freedom, and she closed her eyes, allowing herself to fully absorb the sensation. "This is my favorite place," Mark said, softly gazing out at the waves. "Whenever life felt too heavy, I'd come here. Something about the ocean, it reminds me that we're all just a small part of something much larger." It's humbling. Lyria opened her eyes, looking at them with a tenderness she could no longer hide. Thank you for bringing me here, Mark. I've seen so many worlds, beauty. Never felt this. She gestured to the waves, to the sky, to the land that stretched out. Around them, this sense of connection. It's as if I'm part of something, not just above it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the waves lap at the shore, the sky changing hues as the sun began to set. Leah felt a quiet peace settle within her, a feeling of belonging that she hadn't known she was capable of in this moment. She was not a queen, not heir of an empire. She was simply Leah, a woman sitting beside someone who had come to mean more to her than she could put into words. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light over the watermark, Rich Adento, his bag pulling out a small worn notebook, he handed it to her, his expression warm yet uncertain. These are memories, thoughts I've written down over the years. I'd like you to have it, if you want. It's nothing grand, just pieces of my life. But he trailed off, a hint of vulnerability in his gaze. Lara took the notebook, her heart swelling at the gesture. She opened it, her fingers tracing over the inked word sketches, notes, and reflections that filled the pages. It was a piece of him, a fragment of his world, offered freely and without reservation. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, a surge of emotion she hadn't expected. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. This means more to me than you know. They stayed by the ocean until the stars emerged, a blanket of light stretching across the sky. Mark pointed out constellations, telling her stories of Earth's legends, myths, and ancient tales passed down through generations. She listened, enthralled, her heart aching with a longing she could no longer deny. She realized in this quiet moment under the stars that she had found something. She had spent centuries searching for something she hadn't known she needed until it washed her beside her as the night deepened. Mark finally turned to her, his face illuminated by soft starlight. Thank you for coming with me, Lyra, he said, his voice filled with an honesty that pierced her soul. I wanted you to see Earth not just for what it is, but for what it represents to me. It's a place of resilience, of beauty that doesn't demand attention. I hoped it might show you that sometimes life is worth living, not for the grandeur, but for the quiet moments like this. Loria looked at him, her heart racing, a warmth spreading through her that felt like both freedom and surrender. She reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek in a gesture as tender as it was deliberate. I understand, Mark, she murmured, more than you know. In that moment, under the starlit sky, with the waves murmuring in their eternal song, Loria felt something shift within her, a recognition, a knowing, a love that defied the boundaries of her title, her empire. Her very existence. She had granted Mark his wish, share his world, but he had given her something far greater in return, a reason to believe in the possibility of a life beyond duty, a life she had never dared to dream of. And as they sat together, two souls entwined by fate and choice, Loria knew that her heart was forever bound to this place, this planet, and this man who had shown her the beauty of being seen, understood, and perhaps one day loved. Thesters of stellar Shaw, brighter than ever, casting an ethereal glow over Queen Leah's palace, a quiet grandeur woven into soft shadows that filled her chambers. But within the brilliance of her empire, Lyria's heart was restless. She had returned from Earth with memories that haunted her, each one a reminder of a life she had never imagined could be hers. Weeks had passed since that intimate journey. With Marquand, every day her duties had resumed with the weight and authority she had once embraced without question. Council meetings, diplomatic crises, interstellar negotiations. She was the Galactic Queen, a woman whose very presence commanded galaxies. Yet beneath that facade, a new awareness pulsed, a quiet rebellion in her heart. That Mark's presence had awakened. Mark had remained by her ideas, steady as the sun rising over 1,000 worlds. Though his official duty as her healer had come to an end, has stayed on, assisting her advisors with health initiatives and quietly expanding his influence among the palace. staff and the broader empire, but even as they settled back into their routines, an unspoken tension lingered between them. Questions suspended in the silence of each shared glance and fleeting touch one evening as they walked through the palace. Gardens under a canopy of alien flowers that shimmered with a silvery glow, Loria felt the weight off their unspoken bond pressing. Down on her, she stopped beside a fountain, her gaze lost in the play of water that danced inth. Moonlight Mark watched her, his expression open, sensing the turmoil within her. "What's on your mind?" "Leah," he asked gently, his voice a grounding presence. In stillness of the night, she took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her crown settle heavily. "You've been her, not in the literal sense, but in the way her title had come to define her, to trap her in a life that felt both essential and suffocating." She turned to him, her eyes meeting his, with an intensity that took him by surprise. "I've given you 2 wishes, Mark," she began, her voice soft, yet resolute. "Each one has brought me closer to a part of myself I thought I had lost. But now I wonder what you would wish for if you could ask for anything." She hesitated, her next words carrying a vulnerability she hadn't shown to anyone 9 centuries. "If you had one last wish, what would it be?" Mark's gaze softened, a tenderness flickering in his eyes. He reached out, his hand resting gently on hers, and the warmth of his touch seemed to melt the barriers she had built around herself. "Are you sure you want to know?" he said quietly, his tone laced with a hint of fear and hope. She nodded, her heart pounding, each beat echoing with the inevitability of what she already suspected but needed to hear. Mark took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "My usual wish is simple, Luria," he murmured, his voice filled with a quiet, unwavered conviction. "I wish for you to find true happiness, not as a queen, not as the ruler of Stellaris, but as yourself. I want you to experience life, not from a throne or behind walls, but as a person free to choose her own path, her own dreams." His words settled over her like a gentle storm, filling her with both longing and fear. For a moment she could see at a life without the Empire's demands, a life lived on her terms, filled with ordinary beauty and quiet joy, shared with the man who had shown her that she was not merely a queen but a woman deserving of happiness. But reality crashed back into her heart with brutal clarity. She was the Galactic queen. She held power that spanned light years, the protector of countless worlds and billions of lives. How could she abandon her people, her duty, her entire existence for something as fragile and uncertain as personal happiness? Looked away, her gaze fixed on the fountain, the water's endless cycle, a bitter reminder of the life she had been trapped in for centuries. "I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her decision. "Mark, I don't know how to be anything but this. My duty to the Empire is all I have ever known. Without it, I would be nothing." Mark's hand tightened around hers, his warmth anchoring her as she struggled with the tempest of emotions within her. "You are not nothing, Leah," has said, his voice filled with a fierce compassion. "You are someone extraordinary, but you deserve to be happy, to live a life that is truly your own." His words struck something deep within her, a truth she had buried so far down that even she had forgotten it. Was there she had given herself entirely to her empire, her people, her duty, never in stopping to ask if this life, fit this endless chain of responsibilities, was what she truly wanted. As the night wore on, Mark continued to hold her hand, a silent presence that refused to let her fall back into the safety of her old life. And in that quiet something shifted within her, a realization that filled her with both terror and exhilaration. She could leave, she could walk away from it all, from the crown, the empire, the power that had both defined and imprisoned her. But leaving would mean more than simply walking away. It would mean facing the unknown, becoming someone new, semi-inevitable, and open to a life she had never allowed herself to imagine. With a shuddering breath, she turned back to him, her heart racing. "If I leave," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "I won't be Queen Leah anymore. You'll be just a woman, and I don't know who that woman is. I don't know what it means to live a life For myself, Mark's eyes shone with quiet encouragement, his hands still holding hers with unwavering strength and leapt. "Show you, Leah," he said softly. "Let us discover." That life together, the decision felt both terrifying and liberating, like stepping off the edge of a cliff into an endless sky. But as she looked into Mark's eyes, she knew that, for the first time, she was making a choice that was hers and hers alone. The following days were a blur of preparations, each one carefully orchestrated to ensure a smooth transition. She summoned her most trusted advisor, Orland, a man she had known for centuries, whose loyalty and wisdom had been her foundation through countless crises. Orland looked at her with disbelief when she explained her decision, his brow furrowing in concern. "My queen, this is unthinkable," Hestamard, his voice thick with emotion. "The Empire needs you. You are the hard-toothed stellars." Leah placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, her gaze steady. "Orlando are more than capable of leading in my place. I trust you as I have always trusted you. The Empire will endure because it is more than just one person. It is the sum of all our people of TV. Every world, every soul who calls Stellar a Shome." Orland nodded, though a trace of sorrow lingered in his eyes. He could see that her mind was set, and he bowed deeply, accepting the mantle. She was passing on with a gravity that honored her choice, and so on a quiet dawn, beneath a sky painted in the soft colors of a distant sunrise, Loria and Mark prepared to leave the palace. Leah wore a simple gown, the regal of her queenship, left behind, her hair unbound, and her gaze clear, unburdened by the weight off her crown. Mark waited for her, his expression a mixture of joy and understanding, his presence a steady force that had carried her through this journey. They slipped through the palace gates and out into the open, leaving behind the grandeur of Stellaris. For a new beginning, Leah looked back once, a pang of bittersweet nostalgia tugging at her heart, but she felt no regret. She had given her life to her Empire, and now she was taking a part of it back for herself. As they walked together, side by side, she felt a lightness she had never known, a freedom that filled her with wonder and possibility. The world stretched out before her, vast and unknown, a blank canvas waiting for her to paint a new life. They traveled to distant planets, exploring worlds with wonder and curiosity, experiencing life in its raw, unfiltered form. Leah tasted unfamiliar foods, walked through bustling marketplaces, and watched the sunrise over alien oceans. Each day was a revelation, each moment a gift, and with Mark by her side, she felt more alive than she ever had within the walls of her palace. One evening, as they sat beneath a sky filled with twin moons, Mark looked at her, his gaze tender and open. "Are you happy, Leah?" he asked, his voice soft as ice. Already knew the answer. She smiled, her heart swelling with a warmth that felt like home. "Yes, Mark," she whispered. "I am." They held each other under the stars, their bodies pressed close, no longer healer and queen, but simply two souls bound by love, by choice, by the life they had chosen to build together. Leah felt the weight of her old life fall away, placed by a joy that was both fierce and fragile, a happiness that she knew she would cherish for the rest of her days. And as they lay there wrapped in each other's arms, Leah knew that she had found what she had been searching for all along. Not power, not duty, but a life that was wholly and irrevocably her own.